The fire was dying when she sat down across from him. Cyrus Crawford had not heard her coming, which meant either she was extraordinarily skilled at moving through dark terrain, or he had grown dangerously careless after 3 days of hard travel down the coast road. Both possibilities were equally likely, and neither made him feel better as he looked up from the pot of salt fish he had been stirring and found her there, already settled, cross-legged on the flat stone opposite the flames, watching him with pale amber eyes that caught the firelight the way a cat's eyes do. She was an orc. That much was immediately plain. She was tall even sitting, with the broad shoulders and the quietly coiled muscle that orc warriors wore like a second skin. Her face was angular and striking, with a strong jaw, high cheekbones dusted faintly green beneath the warmth of the fire, and 2 small lower tusks that curved up just past her lower lip. Not the great jutting ones of a war-clan elder, but elegant, neat, framing her mouth in a way that was as much beautiful as it was dangerous. Her ears tapered to fine points and bore several rings of hammered copper along the shell. Her hair was black, pulled back from her face and bound into a thick rope of a braid that fell across one shoulder, with small bones and a single sea-glass bead worked into the tie at the end. Her outfit was the armor of someone who moved constantly and fought when she had to. Fitted warrior's leathers dyed a deep coastal brown, supple and close to her body in the way of gear that had been shaped to the wearer over months of use. A sleeveless vest laced up the front with cord, hugging her torso, leaving her arms bare to show the coil of muscle and the old scar that ran from her left shoulder to her elbow in a thin white line. Below that, fitted leather breeches tucked into hard-soled boots that came to mid-calf. A short cloak of oiled wool hung from one shoulder, pinned with a bone clasp. A curved short blade rested in a sheath at her hip. She had not drawn it. She said nothing. Cyrus stirred the pot once. He looked at her. He looked at the darkness behind her, checking for others. There were none that he could see, and the horses had not spooked, which meant she had come alone. He looked back at the fire. He reached for a second tin cup from his pack, filled it with the fish broth, and set it on the stone beside the flames near her side, within easy reach. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. She said nothing, but after a moment she picked it up and drank. That was how the night began. He did not ask her name. She did not offer it. He ate his broth and she drank hers, and the fire built back up between them, and the sound of the sea came up from somewhere below the ridge line, a low, rhythmic thunder that told him they were closer to the cliffs than he had thought. The wind off the water smelled of brine and kelp and the particular sharpness of a coming cold front. He pulled his wool coat tighter and added the last of his dry wood to the fire. She watched him do all of it with those amber eyes, and she never looked afraid, never looked threatening. She looked, if he was honest, like someone who had been walking for a very long time and had found a fire and chosen to stop. He understood that feeling perfectly. Cyrus Crawford was 28 years old, and he had been walking, in one sense or another, for the past 4 years. He had a farm, or what was left of one. 40 acres of coastal land, 2 days' ride north of the port town of Salter's Reach, at the place where the cliff road came down from the highlands and opened into a stretch of sheltered valley just above the waterline. The land was his father's before it was his, and his grandfather's before that. 2 seasons of blight, 1 catastrophic storm that had taken the barn roof and half the stored grain, and then the year of the wrong seed that the traveling merchant had sold him, seed that looked right but grew wrong, had reduced what had once been a decent small holding to something very nearly worthless. He still had the house, the land, and a debt to the moneylender in Salter's Reach that made him feel slightly sick when he thought about it. He was heading to the cove, not for pleasure. He had heard, through the kind of conversations that happen in the back corners of taverns, that a man named Hadrick Vole was running a smuggler's operation out of the cave system beneath the sea cliffs south of Salter's Reach, and that Hadrick sometimes hired day labor men willing to shift cargo, keep their mouths shut, and ask no questions. The pay was in hard coin, and Cyrus needed hard coin more than he needed his conscience kept clean. He was not proud of where he was going, but he was going. The woman across the fire made no moves that were threatening and no sounds that were unnecessary. At some point in the deep watch of the night, between the second and third hours, she lay down on her side on the flat stone with her cloak pulled across her, and she slept with the swift, complete efficiency of someone trained to rest whenever resting was possible. He watched her sleep for a moment and then felt immediately embarrassed by that and looked at the fire instead. He kept the fire through the night. He slept in short stretches, waking to feed the flames, and each time he woke she was still there, still and breathing, and he felt, without entirely knowing why, less lonely than he had felt in quite a while. In the morning, when the gray light came in off the water and the fire had burned to bright coals, she sat up, combed her braid back over her shoulder with her fingers, and looked at him across the fading warmth. "My name is Rasha," she said. Her voice was low, with a coastal accent that he did not recognize but that carried the particular cadence of someone who had learned to speak the common tongue from salt traders rather than scholars. "Rasha Mudborn. I am going to the cove." Cyrus blinked. He had been awake for perhaps 10 seconds. "Which cove?" She looked at him as if he had asked which direction the sea was. "Vole's Cove, the one beneath the cliffs, the smugglers' cove." He stared at her. She stared back. "That is where I am going," he said slowly. "I know," she said. "I have been following you since the Crow's Fork crossroads. You have a map in your left breast pocket that you check every 4 hours, and you walk like someone who knows exactly where they are going but very much wishes they did not have to." He opened his mouth, closed it, and then managed, "You followed me for 2 days. I needed to know if you were going to the cove or if you were going to report the cove to the garrison at Salter's Reach." She said it plainly, as if this was a completely reasonable explanation for 2 days of unseen pursuit. "And you decided I was not going to report it." You did not turn back. She stood, and she was taller than he had guessed, perhaps a head and a half taller than him, which put her at a height that was genuinely imposing even by orc standards. She stretched, and her spine cracked in 3 places, and she looked marginally more comfortable. "You fed me last night. I left a cup. It was good broth." She said it without particular inflection, but something in the way she said it suggested that it meant something. She picked up her short cloak and pinned it. "I have business with Hadrick Vole. You have business with Hadrick Vole. We may as well walk together." "I do not know you," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You know my name now." "I know yours. Cyrus Crawford from the Valley Farm north of the Reach. Your neighbor Ben Hooper told someone in a tavern that you had gone south for coin work, and someone told someone else, and it reached me." She paused. "I am not going to rob you. I do not need what you have." He thought about that for a moment, and then he began to pack his kit, because she was right that they were going to the same place, and there was no practical argument against walking with someone who had already had a dozen opportunities to kill him in his sleep and had drunk his broth instead. They walked south along the cliff road as the morning came in cold and bright off the water. The sky was the pale gray-blue of early winter, and the sea below was the color of slate, chopped into white peaks by a northerly that pushed against their backs and made the walking faster. She moved with a long, easy stride that he had to push himself to match, and she did not slow for him, but she did not pull ahead either. She seemed to calibrate automatically, the way someone does when they are used to traveling with others of different sizes. "What is your business with Vole?" he asked once they had covered a mile and he was warm enough to be curious again. "Information," she said. "There is something in those caves that does not belong to Vole. I need to know if it is still there." "What kind of something?" She glanced at him sideways, and the amber in her eyes caught the winter light, and he noticed again that she was genuinely striking in a way that he found somewhat distracting. "The kind I will tell you about when I know you better." He nodded. That was fair enough. They did not talk for another mile after that, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised him. He was not generally a man who felt comfortable in silence with strangers. He was not generally a man who felt comfortable with strangers at all, if he was honest. He was the kind of person who had always been better with land and tools than with people, better at knowing when a fence post needed resetting, or when a field had been worked too hard than at reading what a person wanted from him. His wife had told him that, 3 years ago, before she left, she had not been entirely wrong, but the silence with Rasha Mudborn felt different. It felt like the silence of someone who was simply not in the habit of filling air with unnecessary sound, and he found that he appreciated it. The path down to the cove was steep and treacherous, cut into the cliff face in a series of switchbacks that someone had improved with rough log steps in the worst places. The smell of the sea intensified as they descended brine and cold rock, and the sour note of seaweed rotting at the tide line. The sound of the waves grew from a distant roar to something immediate and surrounding, bouncing off the cliff walls on both sides. The cove opened below them in a rough crescent of gray sand, sheltered on 3 sides by the cliffs. On the far wall, the rock face was riddled with cave mouths, some small, some large enough to swallow a cargo boat. Several boats were indeed present, pulled up on the sand or anchored in the calmer water near the cave entrances. There were men moving around the beach, maybe 15 or 20 that Cyrus could see, and a collection of rough structures built against the cliff base. A long storage shed, a cookfire with a canopy, a pen for horses, and what appeared to be a kind of rough common room open on one side. At the center of it all, standing on a crate near the largest cave mouth with a cup in one hand and a ledger in the other, was Hadrick Vole. Vole was a short, barrel-chested man of perhaps 50, with a shaved head and a white beard that he kept trimmed close, and the kind of deep weathering on his face that comes from a lifetime of working the coast. He wore a captain's coat of heavy wool, well-made and salt-stained, and he had the look of someone who was accustomed to being listened to. He saw them coming down the cliff path and he waited, watching, and when they reached the beach he looked at Cyrus first and then looked at Rasha, and his expression did something complicated. "Crawford," he said, because he had been expecting Cyrus, having received word through the same chain of tavern conversations that had sent Cyrus south. "And who is this?" "My name is Rasha Mudborn," she said, before Cyrus could answer. "I sent word ahead 2 weeks ago through a man named Corrigan. He told me you had agreed to speak with me." Vole looked at her for a long moment with the particular expression that Cyrus had seen on men's faces when they were trying to decide whether to be afraid or hostile and settling on a kind of grudging neutrality. "Corrigan did mention an orc contact," he admitted. "Did not mention she was coming in company with my new cargo man." "We traveled the same road," Rasha said. Vole glanced between them and then, apparently deciding that this was not worth worrying about, jerked his head toward the common room. "Come in then, both of you, we will talk." The common room was warmer than the beach, heated by a clay stove in the corner and smelling of smoke and damp wool, and the particular stale salt smell of a place where people live close to the ocean without enough ventilation. There were 4 other men in the room, all of them watching Rasha with the kind of wary attention that Cyrus was increasingly recognizing as the standard greeting she received from strangers. One of them, a big, raw-boned man with a red beard and cold eyes, who introduced himself as Maris, when Vole said his name, watched her not with wariness, but with something more aggressive, a kind of measuring contempt that he made no effort to hide. "Orc woman," Maris said when Vole had made the introductions. He said it the way you would say a thing you had stepped in. "How does an orc end up working the coast roads?" Rasha did not look at him. She was looking at Vole. "You told him I was coming," she asked Vole. "He is my second," Vole said. "He knows the operation." "Then I will deal with you and not with him." She said it as flatly and finally as shutting a door, and Maris's jaw tightened, but Vole held up a hand and Maris sat back. Cyrus watched this and felt, quietly and with some surprise, a wash of respect for the way she had handled it. He had seen people try to brush off Maris in taverns before. The man had a local reputation, and it usually went badly. Rasha had done it without raising her voice or reaching for her blade, and she had clearly won, because Morris was sitting back and Vole was the one now looking at her with something closer to proper attention. The deal Rasha had with Vole was this. She knew where a sunken wreck lay in a particular sea cave 200 yards south of the main cove, accessible only at low tide through a passage in the rock that you had to swim. The wreck had been a coastal transport, sunk 3 years ago in a storm, and among its cargo was an iron-bound chest that had belonged to an Orc clan elder, her mother's sister, and which contained documents and objects of considerable significance to her clan that had been in transit when the ship went down. She wanted the chest recovered. Vole wanted the other cargo from the wreck, which included several crates of preserved goods, bronze ingots, and what Rasha believed were 3 bolts of high-grade Marathi silk that had survived the sinking and sealed oilskin. They had agreed in the correspondence to split the operation. Rasha would dive for the chest and show Vole's people where the other cargo lay, and Vole would provide the equipment, the boats, and the manpower for the recovery. The problem, Vole explained, was the weather. He spread a hand toward the cave mouth and the gray sky beyond it. Northerly has been blowing for 5 days. Seas are up. Diving in that passage in this water means diving in a washing machine, and I have lost 2 men to the rip in that cut before. We wait for the weather to turn. Rasha studied the sky with the expression of someone who was very good at reading weather and did not like what she was reading. How long? Could be 3 days. Could be 2 weeks. Vole spread his hands. It is winter. We wait. This was, Cyrus understood, why he was here. Vole needed men willing to stay in the cove through the wait, to work the existing cargo operation and be available for the salvage when the weather turned. The pay was a flat daily rate plus a share of the recovery, and the arrangement made financial sense in a way that had seemed clean when viewed from the outside of it. Inside it, looking at the gray sky and the rough water and the cave walls dripping with cold seepage, he felt somewhat less sanguine. He stayed. There was nothing else to do. The debt did not pause because the weather was bad. For 2 days the wind drove rain horizontal against the cliff face, and the temperature dropped in a way that felt deliberate and personal. The common room filled up with damp men playing cards and arguing about nothing. There were 16 of them in total. Vole's regular crew of 8, 3 freelancers like Cyrus, and 5 men who were specifically there for the salvage dive, including a lean, darkly tanned man named Petra who apparently dove professionally and charged for it accordingly. Rasha occupied a corner of the common room with the self-possessed stillness of someone, completely comfortable being the only Orc in a room full of suspicious strangers. She slept little, ate efficiently, and spent her time either studying the cave entrance with the tidal charts Vole had provided or doing maintenance on her blade and gear with precise, methodical care. The men gave her a wide berth, all except Morris, who gave her the opposite of a wide berth. Morris did not threaten her directly. He was smarter than that. He did it sideways, a comment here, a look there, a joke told loudly to someone else that was aimed at her. The second night, when the common room was full and loud with the rum that Vole allowed in strictly limited quantities, Morris stood up from his card game and said to the room at large, "Always found it strange how Orc females travel alone. Makes you wonder what clan would send a woman by herself. Almost like maybe she does not have a clan anymore." The room went a little quiet. Not fully quiet, but the kind of quiet where everyone is listening while pretending not to. Rasha had been sitting 6 feet away reading a tide chart. She did not look up. "Clanless Orc," Morris continued with great pleasantness, "is a dangerous thing. No allegiance, no law. No one to call account if she decides to take what she wants." Cyrus had been at the other end of the room and he stood up before he had entirely decided to. He moved to the card table and he sat down across from Morris in the empty chair, picked up the deck, and started dealing with the deliberate ease of someone who has nowhere else to be. "Cards," he said. Morris looked at him. "I was talking." "I know," Cyrus said pleasantly. "I thought we could play cards instead." Morris stared at him for a long moment, and the room was quiet in a more complete way now. Morris was 2 stone heavier than Cyrus and half a head taller, and had the look of someone who had never once lost a fight he had decided to start. Cyrus met his eyes with a calm steadiness that he did not entirely feel but had learned a long time ago to project, the same calm he used on spooked horses and on the moneylender in Salter's Reach. Then Morris laughed, a short and not entirely warm sound, and he picked up his cards. "Fine," he said. "We play cards." Rasha did not look up from her tide chart, but when the room noise went back to normal, Cyrus caught, from the corner of his eye, the brief motion of her turning to look at him. He did not look back. He played cards. Later, when the fire had burned low and most of the room was asleep, she came and crouched beside where he was sitting against the wall and said, quietly enough that no one else could hear, "You did not have to do that." "I know," he said. "He will not forget it." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment, studying him with those amber eyes in the low light. This close, he could see that there was a network of very fine old scars along her jaw, the kind left by years of fighting rather than a single incident, and that the sea glass bead in her braid was a deep translucent green that caught the firelight. She smelled of salt air and the cedar oil she used on her leather. "Why?" she asked. He thought about it. "Because it was the right thing," he said, "and because you drank my broth." She looked at him for another moment, and then she made a sound that he gradually recognized with some surprised pleasure as the low orc equivalent of a laugh, a breath through the nose, a slight curl at one corner of her mouth. "Good broth," she said again, and went back to her corner. He sat awake for a while after that, thinking about nothing in particular. The storm worsened on the third day. Worsened was actually insufficient. It did not worsen so much as arrive in a completely different and far more serious form. What had been a strong winter blow became, by the third morning, something approaching a genuine gale. The sea below the cove entrance rose in great gray-green walls that crashed against the cave mouths and sent spray 30 feet into the air. The boats were dragged further up the beach and anchored with doubled lines. The cove, which had felt contained and sheltered before, suddenly showed what it truly was, a hole in the cliff face with the sea trying to fill it. Vole ordered everyone off the beach and into the inner caves, which were accessible through the large main entrance, and opened into a series of chambers that went back into the rock for perhaps 200 feet. They were dry mostly, with a trickle of fresh water along one wall where a spring ran through the rock, and they were cold in a way that was different from the cold outside, the cold of the earth rather than the cold of the air, damp and still and seeping. Men built fires in the chambers using the wood that Vole kept stacked there for exactly this purpose, and the cave system filled with smoke and firelight and the muffled thunder of the storm outside. Rasha had gone out onto the beach once, early in the gale, to check on the boats with 2 of Vole's men, and had come back with her cloak soaked through and her hair plastered to her face, and an expression of precise, controlled concern that told Cyrus she was not frightened but was paying close attention. He handed her a dry cloth from his pack without being asked. She looked at it, looked at him, and took it. They were confined together in the inner caves for 4 days. 4 days is a long time in a confined space with 15 other people and limited resources and a storm howling outside. Arguments happened. Minor fights happened. Morris broke another man's nose on day 2 over a dice game that had been going badly, and Vole docked him pay for it, which made Morris's temper shorter than it had already been. Food was rationed from what was stored in the caves. Fresh water was not a problem. Warmth was managed. Boredom was the actual enemy. Cyrus spent the time doing what he always did when he had idle hours and no productive work to direct them toward. He thought about the farm. He went through the numbers in his head, as he had 1,000 times, looking for the angle he was missing. He thought about the soil, which was good. The valley land was genuinely good soil, dark and rich with the runoff from the hills above it. He thought about what would grow there that had not already been tried, what could be grown that would command a price in Salter's Reach that ordinary grain or vegetables would not. "You are calculating," Rasha said. They had ended up, without particular planning, sitting in the same section of the second cave chamber, the one nearest the fire for most of the confinement. It had simply become their spot. He had his back to the rock and she had hers, 3 feet of cave floor between them, and the firelight moved on the stone walls around them. "How can you tell?" he asked. "Your expression." She gestured vaguely at her own face to indicate his. "You look like a man doing sums." He laughed, a short, surprised sound. "That is exactly what I am doing." "The farm," she said, not a question. "The farm," he confirmed. "I have 40 acres of coastal valley land that is genuinely good soil, and I cannot make it pay enough to cover what I owe. I keep thinking there is an answer I have not found yet." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What does good coastal valley soil grow that commands the highest price?" he thought. "Certain herbs, medicinal ones, and dye plants woad. But those need specialist buyers, and I do not have the connections." "What if you had the connections?" He looked at her. "Do you know anyone who buys medicinal herbs?" "My clan does," she said. "We trade with a healers cooperative in the highlands, and they pay well for quality coastal herbs: sea lavender, wild fennel, rocksamphire. Things that grow on the cliff margins." She paused. "Things that would grow on your 40 acres. He stared at her. "You know what grows on Cliff Valley land?" "My mother's family held land like that before the war," she said, and the word war carried no particular emotion, just the weight of something acknowledged and set aside. "I grew up knowing that soil." He sat with that for a moment, the idea settling into the shape of his thinking like a key turning in a lock he had been picking for years. "Medicinal herbs," he said slowly. "And the clans trade connections." "It is not a gift," she said quickly, as if she wanted to be clear about that. "My clan would need a reliable and honest supplier. It would be a trade arrangement, fair price for fair goods." "I am not looking for a gift," he said, and he meant it. "A fair arrangement is exactly what I want." They looked at each other across the cave fire. The sound of the storm outside was a constant low roar through the rock, muffled but present like a heartbeat. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. She thought about it for a moment longer than he expected, which meant she was actually thinking about it rather than giving him a prepared answer. "You have good broth," she said finally, "and you sat down at Morris's card table for me. That is not enough reason to give someone a trade connection." "It is enough reason to start," she said, and something in the way she said it, quiet and careful and without any of the ease of casual conversation, made him understand that this was not a small thing she was saying. That this was Rasha Mudborn, who did not give things easily, saying that he had begun to earn something. He did not know what to do with that entirely, but he felt it settle somewhere in his chest and stay there. On the 4th day the storm broke. It did not ease gradually, it stopped. The roaring outside the cave went from constant to absent in the space of an hour, and then the men were moving out onto the beach to assess the damage, and Cyrus stood at the cave entrance in the sudden cold stillness and watched the sea, which was still running high but with a different character, the organized swell of aftermath rather than the chaos of the gale itself. Rasha stood beside him and studied the water with the focused attention of someone reading a language. "Tomorrow," she said. "The passage will be safe by tomorrow's low tide." "You know water," he said. "I know these cliffs," she said. "I have known them since I was a girl. My people came this way in the old migrations, before the war divided the territories. There are old clan marks in some of these caves." She glanced at him. "That is also why I want the chest." The elder who was transporting it was carrying the records of those marks, the proof of the old roots, the old agreements. "Without them, my clan has no legal claim to the coastal trade corridor they have been using for 40 years. If those papers are gone, the border garrison can revoke our passage permits and cut us off from the coast entirely." That was the whole of it, and he heard it in full for the first time, and it was significantly more serious than information about a sunken chest. This was clan survival. This was the difference between a trade network that kept several hundred people fed through winter and the loss of it. "And Vol knows all of this?" he asked. "Vol knows there is a chest with valuable clan documents," she said. He does not know specifically what those documents mean. I would prefer to keep it that way until I have the chest in my hands." He nodded. That made sense, and it was the kind of careful thinking he was coming to associate with her, always a step ahead, always holding something in reserve, not from dishonesty but from the hard-learned wisdom of someone who knew that trust was built incrementally, and that giving too much too soon was its own kind of danger. He also thought, not for the first time, that she had told him. She had told him the full thing, when she had not told Vole. He did not make anything of it out loud, but he thought about it. The next morning at low tide, Petra the dive man stripped to his dive clothes, tight oiled wool and a weight belt, and Rasha stripped down to the fitted underlayer of her warrior's leathers, which proved to be a close-fitting sleeveless shirt and breeches of the same material, still striking in a different way than the full outfit. And she was absolutely calm about the water in a way that the professional diver had not expected, and could not quite hide that he was impressed by. The passage to the sunken wreck was through a cut in the outer rock of the cove wall that was only accessible at the lowest point of the tide, and it was exactly as unpleasant as advertised. A narrow tunnel through rock that opened into a sea cave beyond, and the tunnel was half submerged even at low water. You went through it swimming, with the rock 6 inches above your head and the current pushing and pulling with the residual swell. Cyrus stood on the beach and watched them go, and he felt the cold knot of worry in his stomach that he had not expected to feel and did not entirely have a name for. Mara stood nearby, also watching. "The rock crack opens up sudden," he said to Cyrus, but about Rasha in the way that was his manner. "Diver does not know it, could lose her in there." "She knows it," Cyrus said. "She grew up on these cliffs." "Sure she did." Mara smiled with his teeth. "Long swim for a body to come back up." Cyrus turned and looked at him very directly, with the kind of look that does not involve any particular expression but that gets a message across clearly. "Maris," he said, "that is enough." Maris held his gaze for a moment and then shrugged and walked away. They were in the water for 40 minutes. It felt much longer from the beach. Then they surfaced in the cut, Petra first, gasping, and then Rasha, who came up breathing hard but controlled. And they were dragging a rope, and the rope was attached to something below the water in the cave beyond. The recovery took another 2 hours, with boats brought around the outside of the rock to the cave entrance and Vole's men doing the work of lifting and hauling. And in the end, they brought up the iron-bound chest, and 4 crates of goods, and 2 rolls of silk that had survived 3 years underwater in their oilskin wrapping remarkably well. The chest was laid on the beach and Rasha crouched over it with her hands on the lid, and it was locked with a mechanism that had rusted solid in the salt water. She produced a short pry tool from somewhere and worked at the lock with precise, patient force, and when it gave way she opened the lid and looked inside, and Cyrus, standing behind and to the side, watched her face. She went very still. Then she reached in and lifted out a packet of documents wrapped in oilskin that had kept them entirely dry, and she pressed it between both hands and closed her eyes for just a moment, and he saw her breathe, long and slow, and he understood that whatever this cost her to feel, she was not going to let anyone see it, but that in this moment she was allowing herself one long breath of relief. He did not say anything. He just stood near enough that she could feel he was there. She opened her eyes and looked up and found him immediately, and for a moment the amber of her gaze was very direct and very open, and he had the feeling of being seen all the way through, which should have been uncomfortable and was instead the most comfortable he had felt in a very long time. Vole got his silk and his bronze ingots and his preserved goods, and Rasha got the chest and its contents, and the deal was clean. But the trouble with Maris was not finished. That evening, when the good mood of the successful recovery had loosened everyone's tempers toward the general and Vole had produced actual wine rather than the rationed rum, Maris made his move. He waited until Rasha had gone to the outer cave mouth to sit with the tide charts, alone, and he followed her. Cyrus was not watching. He was eating his supper and talking, for the first time in genuine ease, with Petra about the dive, and he would not have known anything was wrong except that one of Vol's regular men came to his elbow and said quietly, "That big bastard Maris went after the orc woman. I do not know what his plan is, but his face was not right." Cyrus put down his bowl and went. He came out to the outer cave mouth and found Maris standing between Rasha and the cave interior with his arms crossed and his voice low, which was worse in some ways than loud, and Rasha was standing with her back to the sea entrance with her chin up and her hand resting on the hilt of her blade, not drawn, but there. "Told you before," Maris was saying, "that this operation does not need your kind of trouble. You got what you came for. Smart thing would be to take it and go before the weather closes in again, and you end up stuck here all winter with 16 men who do not like you." "I leave when my business here is done," Rasha said. "Your business is done," Maris said. "Move on, orc." "Maris," Cyrus's voice came out flat and carrying, and both of them turned. He walked into the cave mouth and put himself to Rasha's left, not between them but alongside her, facing Maris. "Whatever this is, it is done." Maris looked at him with the patient contempt of a man who has very thoroughly thought about what he is going to do. "Crawford," he said, "you are a hired cargo man who has been here a week. This is none of your business." "She is my traveling companion," Cyrus said. "That makes it my business." "Your traveling companion," Maris said, with a tone that made the phrase into something he found amusing in a way that was clearly designed to provoke. "Funny kind of arrangement." "Particularly," Cyrus said. "It is straightforward. She goes, I go. And I'm a useful cargo man and Vol likes me, so I would rather settle this like adults and all go back inside." There was a silence in which Maris assessed his options. He was bigger. He might win in a straight fight, but Vol was inside and Vol had already docked him pay once this week, and if Vol threw him out of the operation over a grudge fight, he would lose the recovery bonus on top of it. "Fine," Maris said. And he walked back inside, and his shoulder hit Cyrus's as he passed, hard enough to be a statement, not hard enough to start anything. Rasha had not moved. When Maris was gone, she let out a breath and took her hand off the blade hilt and rolled her shoulders back, the motion of someone releasing held tension. She looked at Cyrus. "You keep doing that," she said. "Apparently," he said, "you understand it makes him angrier." "Yes. And you do not care." He thought about that honestly. "I care," he said. "I just care more about the other thing." She looked at him steadily for a long moment, and the sound of the winter sea was a cold roar around them, and the firelight from inside the cave lit her from behind, and she was looking at him with an expression that was very serious and very quiet and very open, which he was learning was the way her face went when she was feeling something she had not decided yet how to handle. Then she stepped forward and she took his face in both her hands. Her hands were large and very warm and slightly rough from the salt water and the cold, and she kissed him. It was not tentative. It was not exploratory. It was the kind of kiss that a person gives when they have decided something and are being clear about it, and it lasted long enough that the cold around them stopped being relevant. When she pulled back, she was watching him with those amber eyes from 6 inches away, and the sea glass bead in her braid swayed near his shoulder. "Is that all right?" she asked, and the question was quiet and genuine rather than rhetorical. He considered telling her that it was the best thing that had happened to him in 4 years, but that seemed like too much to say in a sea cave, with a gale residue still moving the water outside, and Maris 40 feet away on the other side of a rock wall. So he said yes, and then because it was true and seemed important to say, more than all right. Something in her expression shifted not dramatically but warmly, the way a fire shifts when you add good wood to it, from smaller to something that fills the space better. She stepped back and looked at the water. "The passage will hold tomorrow," she said, "and then we need to talk about Maris." "What about Maris?" he asked. "He is not just a bad-tempered man," she said. "I have been watching him since we arrived. He has been moving cargo separately from Vol's operation in the night, small amounts but consistently. He is skimming." Cyrus went still. "You are sure?" "I spent 4 years as a supply officer for my clan's trade network," she said. I know what skimming looks like. She paused. It is not my fight to bring it to Vole, but it is why he wants me gone. I am someone who might notice and say something. He understood, then, why she had stayed close to the tide charts in the evenings. She had not been studying tides. She had been watching the cave mouths. They brought it to Vole the next morning together. Rasha laid out what she had observed with the flat, specific clarity of someone presenting evidence rather than making accusations. And Cyrus backed her account. And Vole listened without expression until she was done, and then sent 2 men to check the secondary storage cave, and they came back 15 minutes later with the confirmation. Vole had Maris removed from the operation that afternoon, with the particular efficiency of a man who had dealt with this kind of thing before, and had no interest in making it more complicated than it needed to be. Maris went, loudly and with threats aimed at both of them, down the beach and up the cliff path, and the watching men said nothing because Maris had not been liked, and the pay they would share now that his portion had been forfeited was welcome in the dead of winter. The cove was quieter after that. Not softer, not easy. It was still 16 men in a sea cave with a winter north wind coming back in off the water, and the temperature dropping again toward something serious. But the specific tension that Maris had brought with him was gone, and in its absence, the place breathed differently. The second cold front came in 3 days later, and this one did not merely blow strong. It came in with a depth of cold that the coast road men called a black frost, the kind that froze the fresh water in the cave spring overnight and hung ice from the cave roofs, and killed the poorly tended fires before dawn. Vole's stored wood ran short on the second day of it, and men were pulling apart the secondary storage shed to feed the fires inside the cave chambers, and rationing was back, and the boats could not move in the ice-rimmed water of the inner cove. They were, straightforwardly, snowed in. Or frozen in. The distinction was technical. The cliff path had iced over and was impassable without gear none of them had. The coastal road above was buried. The sea was showing its winter teeth. They were there until it broke, however long that took. Cyrus worked. It was what he did when he was stressed, and he had spent enough of his life being stressed that he had become very efficient at finding productive work in any situation. He helped reinforce the cave barriers against the wind. He helped reorganize the food stores so that the rationing would last longer. He repaired 2 of the boats using materials from the shed, because the boats were their only exit if the path stayed frozen, and that felt important. Rasha worked alongside him. She did not have to. She was not part of Vole's operation except as a hired contractor, and her contract was technically complete. But she stayed and she worked, and the men who watched her do it with the same steady competence that she applied to everything began to revise, gradually and without any particular announcement, their initial assessments of her. It was small things. She knew which rock in the cave wall was weakest, and would give way to let more smoke out before it built to a dangerous concentration. She knew that the fresh water spring, now frozen on the surface, could be released by a fire built 6 inches from the wall at the right spot, because the rock conducted the heat to the ice plug above the flow. She knew, from the old clan roots, that there was a secondary path down from the cliff top steeper, and harder than the main path but sheltered from the ice by an overhang. That could be made passable with ropes and effort, and she showed 2 of Vole's men how to find it, and they came back 3 hours later with enough additional firewood to last another week, slung in packs down the rope line she had described. She knew these things because she had grown up on cliffs like these, and because she paid attention to everything, and Cyrus watched her do all of it with the feeling that had been building since the first night of the fire, the feeling of witnessing someone remarkable in their element. She saved his life 11 days into the freeze. It happened on the beach, in the midday of a day that had gone temporarily clear and cold enough to crack stone. Several of the men had gone out to work on the boats. The tidal freeze had damaged one of the hulls, and it needed patching before the thaw, and Cyrus had gone with them because he was useful with wood and caulk. The work was cold and precise, and they were perhaps an hour into it when the sound from the cliff face began. It started low, almost inaudible, a deep groan in the rock that vibrated in the chest more than it registered in the ear. Cyrus straightened and looked up and did not immediately see anything. And then Rasha came off the beach at a dead run from the cave mouth where she had been watching, and she was moving with a speed that was startling even knowing what she was. And she hit Cyrus from the side and drove him off his feet, and they went down together onto the sand and rolled. And the section of ice-covered cliff face that had calved away from the rock above them came down in a white roar, and buried the boat hull they had been working on, and 3 other men scrambled and fell, and were fortunately only knocked and bruised. The sound of it was enormous and then gone, leaving white dust and the smell of broken rock and the ringing silence of aftermath. Cyrus was on his back on the sand with Rasha above him, one hand braced on the sand beside his head, looking down at him with an expression that was steady and fierce and a little shaken in the part of it that she was not controlling. "All right," she said. He assessed himself. He was winded. He had sand in his mouth. He was alive. "All right," he said. She did not move immediately. She stayed above him for a moment, breathing, and he could feel the warmth of her even through the cold, and her braid had come loose on one side and the sea glass bead was swinging near his face, and she was looking at him with an intensity that had nothing to do with the ice fall anymore. "You heard it," he said, "before any of us." "I know what rock sounds like when it is going," she said. "I told you, I grew up on cliffs." Around them, the other men were picking themselves up and exclaiming, and one of them, the regular man named Dort who had warned Cyrus about Maris that first week, was staring at Rasha with an expression that had no hostility in it at all, only a stunned and open-mouthed recognition. "She ran," Dort said to the man beside him, loudly enough that several people heard. "Ran straight at it. She did not even hesitate." Rasha had stood up and was dusting sand from her leather and not looking at anyone. Cyrus got to his feet slower, and he put a hand on her arm and she went still and looked at him. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him for a moment, and then she looked away at the cliff, at the raw white scar where the ice had torn away, calculating and assessing. "We need to move everyone away from that section of wall," she said. "It will shed more before it settles." "Rasha," he said. She looked back. "Thank you," he said again, meaning it all the way through, and she held his gaze and then gave that small, breath-through-the-nose sound that was her version of a laugh, but softer this time, warmer. "You make good broth," she said. "I cannot let that go to waste." The other men were looking at her differently from that moment. Not all of them. Some of the more entrenched ones kept their wariness, but most of them, yes. Dort in particular seemed to have done some rapid recalculating of his assumptions, and by evening he was speaking to her directly, as you speak to a person, and the shift in the room's temperature was something that had nothing to do with the fire. Vole noticed it too, and being a practical man, he acted accordingly. He began to consult Rasha about the cave system with the frank directness of a man who has realized he has a resource he has been underusing, and she answered him with equal frankness and no particular satisfaction about having been ignored before, which Cyrus thought said something about her character. The freeze lasted 17 days in total. In those 17 days, they slept side by side. There was not enough space or warmth to do otherwise, and she did not suggest it for any reason other than the cold, and he accepted for no reason other than the cold, and neither of them said anything else about it. But the warmth of sleeping next to her was the best sleep he had gotten in years, and she seemed to feel something similar because she slept deeply when she was beside him in a way that Vole's other men had mentioned she did not when she was elsewhere in the cave. They talked in the nights. Long, slow conversations in the low light of the dying fire, with the frozen world outside and the warmth inside, and the ease of knowing that the day's work was done, and there was nothing required of them until morning. She told him about her clan, the Mudborn clan, which was a coastal trading clan rather than a war clan, which explained the trade routes and the documents and the particular knowledge she carried. She told him about her mother, who had been a trader captain, and her mother's sister who had been the elder transporting the documents when the ship went down. She told him about the war years, when the clan had moved inland and lost the coastal routes and spent a decade rebuilding what they had lost. He told her about the farm. All of it in a way he had not told anyone, not the versions he edited for practicality or the versions he shortened because he was embarrassed, but the full account, including the bad seed year and the moneylender and the way he had felt, that last harvest, standing in a field that should have been full and was not, like the ground itself was refusing him. "Land does that sometimes," she said. "My mother used to say the land is not your enemy when it does that. It is just tired." "That is a kind way to think about it," he said. "She was a kind woman," Rasha said simply. And then after a pause, "The herb arrangement, I meant it. When this is over and you are back at your farm, you write a message and send it through the salt trader's route to the Mudborn clan markers at Venport. I will receive it." "You will be going back to the clan," he said. "Yes," she said. And then, very carefully, "But the Mudborn clan travels. We are not fixed in one place. The coastal route brings us past the valley north of Salter's Reach." She did not say anything else. He lay quiet for a moment, feeling the warmth of her beside him and the cold of the cave above him, and the meaning of what she had not said settling into the place in his chest where things settled when they were true. "I would like that," he said. She was quiet. Then she turned her head and he felt the warmth of her breath against his temple, and she said, very quietly against his hair, "So would I." He reached out and found her hand in the dark, and she let him take it, and they lay like that until they slept. On the 18th morning the temperature broke. It did not warm. It simply stopped being the extraordinary cold it had been, and became merely the ordinary cold of a hard winter on the coast, and the ice on the cliff path began to drip, and the frozen spring thawed and the sea cleared of its ice skin and showed open water again. The cliff path was passable by midday, and Vole called the operation over. The salvage was done. The winter had shown its worst, and there was no percentage in staying through any more of it. He paid out what he owed in coin, weighed carefully, fair, and the men began to pack and move. Cyrus stood at the base of the cliff path with his pack and his wages in hard coin and the particular lightness of having survived something difficult and come out the other side with more than he had gone in with. He counted the coin. It was enough to make a significant payment on the debt. Not all of it, but enough to change the shape of what remained. Rasha came and stood beside him. She had the iron-bound chest, sealed again with new cord, strapped to a pack frame on her back. She was wearing her full outfit again, the fitted leather vest laced up the front, the close leather breeches, the half-cloak with the bone clasp, the copper rings in her tapered ears, and the sea-glass bead was back in her braid. She looked exactly like someone who had arrived at this cove for a reason and had accomplished it. "The path is clear," she said. "Yes," he said. They looked at the path. It went up and then split at the top north to his farm, east to Venport and the clan routes. "Rasha," he said. She looked at him. "The herb arrangement," he said. "I want to do it right. I want to grow what your clan needs and provide it reliably and have a fair agreement in writing. I want it to be a real thing." "It will be," she said. "I will speak to the clan traders. They will want to meet you eventually, inspect the land, assess the yield potential. That is how our arrangements work." "I understand," he said. And then he said, because he had been thinking about this for 3 days and he was going to say it plainly or not at all, "I would rather meet them with you beside me than as a stranger they have not yet decided about." She was quiet. "I know you have to take the documents back," he said. "I know the clan needs you. I am not asking you to stay. I am asking whether there is a world in which you come to the farm before you go east." She was looking at him with that open, steady, very serious expression that he now knew meant she was feeling something she was still working out how to hold. "You want me to come to your farm," she said. "Yes. A homestead farm that is barely breaking even. 40 acres of good coastal valley soil," he said, "with plans to grow medicinal herbs for a highland cooperative and the beginnings of a trade arrangement with the Mudborn clan. I think that is a better description." Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile, but the ancestor of one. That is a better description, she agreed. Will you come? He asked. She looked up at the cliff path, and then she looked at him and she said, yes. They went up the path together. The road north to the farm was 2 days of hard walking, and they made it in exactly that, stopping overnight at the kind of traveler's rock shelter that dotted the coast road and were kept, by some informal agreement of all who used the road, stocked with dry wood and basic tools. They built a fire in the shelter and ate from their remaining trail provisions, and she leaned against his shoulder as the night came in, and he put his arm around her, and she settled against him with the complete and unhurried ease of someone who has decided something. He told her about the farm in more detail. Not the worried version he had told before, but the actual version, the layout of the land, which fields had been fallowed and which had not, where the spring ran closest to the surface and made irrigation possible, the south-facing slope that got the most light. She listened the way she listened to everything, with her complete attention. Sea lavender grows well on south-facing slopes, she said, and rock samphire spreads on its own once it is established. The first season would be light yield, but by the 3rd year you would have enough to supply the cooperative at a volume they would notice. 3 years is a long time, he said. Farms are long-time operations, she said. You know that. I know it, he agreed. I just have not always felt it. She turned to look at him. The firelight moved on her face, on the strong angles of it, on the copper rings and the sea glass bead, and she looked at him with the directness that he had come to love, the specific, honest, unflinching way she directed her attention when something mattered to her. I am going to tell you something, she said, and I want you to hear it as I mean it rather than as something polite. All right, he said. You are a good man, she said. Not in the ordinary sense people use that phrase, I mean specifically. You are good at reading a situation and acting correctly in it. You are good at doing work that needs doing without being asked. You are good at sitting still with someone when they need to be sat with. You are good at broth. The last one was said with the smallest thread of warmth at the corner of her mouth. I have traveled with a great many people and worked alongside a great many more, and these are not common qualities. They are the ones I value most. He was quiet for a moment because his throat had done something it sometimes did when something true reached him. Rasha, he said. I am not finished, she said. I am telling you this because you are going to go back to your farm and you are going to doubt it, the way you doubt it, the way you have been doubting it for years. I want you to have heard it from me before that happens. Why does it matter, he said, whether I have heard it from you? She looked at him steadily. Because I do not say things I do not mean, she said, and I think you know that. He did know that. He had known it from the first morning at the fire when she had said her name and told him where she was going with a directness that left no room for performance. All right, he said. I hear you. She nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the fire. He turned back to the fire too, and then, because it was the truth and because she was not the only one who said things she meant, he said, I think you are the most remarkable person I have ever sat across a fire from. She was quiet for a moment. Then the breath through the nose sound, but so warm this time that it was almost a laugh. That is a very specific compliment. It is a very specific truth, he said. She leaned back against his shoulder and he held her, and the fire burned and the coast wind moved outside the shelter, and he felt, for the first time in a very long time, like someone who had enough. The farm, when they reached it on the afternoon of the 2nd day, looked the way it always looked when he had been away for more than a week, as if it had been waiting for him to come back and fix the things it had let slide in his absence. The gate latch was stiff. The winter kitchen garden had frost damage along one row. The roof of the main house had shed a tile somewhere over the south eave, and he could see the bare spot from the yard. He watched Rasha take it all in. She stood at the gate with her pack and the chest on her back, and looked at the 40 acres of coastal valley land with the serious, evaluating attention of someone who knows land. Good drainage, she said. Yes, he said. The south slope gets afternoon light from the ridge break there. She indicated the gap in the cliff line to the southwest, where the winter sun fell through at a low angle. "I know," he said. "I have never grown anything up there. It is too thin on top, the soil is rocky." "Campfire likes rocky soil," she said. "See lavender too, if you add the right amendment. The clay soil in your lower valley fields is better for the fennel." He looked at her, and he felt the future opening up in the way futures only do when you stop being afraid of them. Not the anxious futures he had been calculating in the cave, full of numbers and risks, but the real one with soil and weather and years and another person standing in the yard beside you knowing the same land you know. "You have planned it already," he said. "I have been thinking about it since the cave," she said. "Since which day in the cave?" he asked, genuinely curious. She thought about it. "The second day of the freeze," she said. "When you repaired the boat hull, I was watching your hands." He looked at his hands. They were a farmer's hands, rough and broad, with old blisters and old calluses and the particular wear of someone who had spent years working on things that needed mending. "My hands," he said. "You work with care," she said. "Every repair you made in that cave, you made it right. Not just enough to get by right. That is the kind of attention that land rewards." She looked at the farm again. "Your land has been unlucky, not neglected." Something about that cracked open a thing in his chest that he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it was there. The feeling of the bad years, of failure, of having done wrong by the land somehow. She had looked at it all and named it correctly, and the naming of it changed it. He put his arm around her, standing at the gate of his farm, and she leaned into him, her head at his shoulder, and they stood there for a moment in the cold afternoon light before going inside. She stayed 3 weeks. 3 weeks was longer than either of them had said, and shorter than either of them wanted. But the chest needed to go to the clan, and the documents needed to be registered before the winter term of the border garrison's permit review, which happened at the beginning of the second month. And that was a fixed date that the world was not going to adjust for sentiment. They spent the 3 weeks the way farmers and travelers have always spent unexpected time together. In work, in conversation, in the quiet pleasure of shared routine, and in the growing warmth of knowing someone the way you only know someone when you have been cold with them and frightened with them and honest with them in a cave for 17 days. He showed her every part of the farm. She assessed every part of it. They walked the south slope on a clear day, and she crouched and pressed the soil between her fingers and told him the specific amendments it would need, and he wrote it down in the back of the account book he kept for the farm. They stood at the edge of the lower valley field in the last light, and she described exactly how she had seen fennel cultivated on similar land, and he asked questions and she answered them, and the conversation was both practical and the most alive he had felt in years. In the evenings they sat at the kitchen table, which was a good solid table that his grandfather had made, and they ate what the farm's winter stores provided: pickled things, dried things, the salt fish that was a staple of every coastal house, and they talked about everything and nothing with the comfort of people who have run out of the need to be careful with each other. The first time he kissed her, she kissed back with the same decided clarity that she brought to everything, and then laughed, really laughed. Not the small breath she used for humor, but a full, real sound, because he had been so obviously building up to it all evening and she had been watching him do it. "You were going to say something first," she said. "You were working on it." "I was finding the right words," he said with dignity. "You do not need words for that," she said, which he found to be an excellent point. After that, the kissing was not an event that required preparation. It was simply part of the evenings and the mornings, and occasionally the middle of days when they were both covered in soil or sawdust, or whatever the day had required, and it seemed, without discussion, the right thing to do. She was the one who stayed after the fire burned low one night and took his face in her hands and looked at him for a long moment with those amber eyes and said, quietly, "I do not do things I am not sure of." "I know," he said. "I am sure of this," she said. And the warmth that followed was not the cold of the cave, or the brine of the sea, or the hard worry of the debt, or the long specific loneliness of the bad years. It was the warmth of being entirely, specifically, thoroughly wanted by someone who did not give herself lightly to wanting, and who had looked at him, all of him, the farm and the debt and the doubt and the broth and the card table and the hands that repaired things right, and had chosen him anyway. Again and again. It was the best thing he had ever felt. She left on a gray morning 2 days before the border garrison's permit review, with the chest on her back and her cloak pinned and her braid freshly done with the sea glass bead at the end. He walked her to the road. At the road she stopped and turned and looked at him with the serious, open expression that he knew now was love, had known for a while, had not said because she had not said, and was beginning to suspect she had not said for the same reason he had not. "The clan will take 3 to 4 weeks to process the documents and register the claims," she said. "After that, the coastal route opens for the spring season. The Mudborn trade boats move north to south beginning in the 3rd month. Past the valley north of Salter's Reach," he said. "Past the valley," she agreed. He took her hand, both hands, and held them. "Come back," he said. "I am coming back," she said. It was not a promise phrased as reassurance. It was a statement of fact, the way she stated facts. "And when I do, I am going to bring a trade negotiator and a seed assessment from our Highland supplier, and we are going to spend a week drawing up the formal arrangement. And after the week," he said, she looked at him directly, "that depends on what you want." "I want you to stay," he said. It was as plain as he could make it. "On the farm with me. For as long as you want to stay, which I hope is considerably longer than a week." Something crossed her face that he had not seen before, a kind of softness that was different from warmth, something that came from deeper than warmth. She stepped forward and she held him, both arms, the way she moved when she had decided something, and he held her back, and they stood at the edge of the road with the winter sea below the cliff and the farm behind them and the morning gray around them. "I will stay," she said, against his hair. "The clan travels, but I have been a traveler long enough. Good coastal valley soil." He could hear the thread of warmth in her voice. "I know a south-facing slope that needs amending." He laughed into her shoulder. She pulled back and looked at him one more time, and then she turned and walked east along the road, and he watched her go. And she did not look back, but she lifted one hand as she rounded the first bend, and then she was gone. He went back to the farm, and he began the winter soil work, and he began the plans for the south slope, and he wrote a formal letter for the Mudborn clan traders outlining the herb cultivation proposal in the clearest terms he could manage, and he put new straw in the second sleeping room because it needed doing, and he found, doing it, that it did not feel as heavy as it might have. She came back in the 3rd month. She came up the cliff road on a morning when the first light was beginning to push through the spring cloud, and the valley below the farm was showing the preliminary green of early growth, and she was not alone. There were 2 other Mudborn traders with her, a lean older man named Das who handled agreements, and a younger woman named Fen who assessed land. But she came ahead of them up the track, and he saw her coming from the yard where he was mending the gate latch, which he had finally gotten around to. And he dropped the tool and went to meet her. She was wearing the fitted leather vest and the close breeches and the half-cloak with the bone clasp and the copper rings and the sea-glass bead, exactly as he had last seen her, and she walked up the track with the long, easy stride he knew, and she looked at the farm with fresh eyes and then looked at him, and the amber of her gaze was the warmest it had ever been. "The south slope," she said when they were close enough. "You have turned the soil already." "I had time," he said. He was smiling, which he had not been doing enough of, and he could feel it. "I had plans." She stepped up to him and took his face in her hands and kissed him, right there in the track, which the 2 traders behind her tactfully pretended not to see. "The documents are registered," she said. "The clan's coastal corridor is secure. We have the legal standing back." She said it with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has been fighting for something for a long time and has now won it. "Good," he said. And then, because he had been thinking about it for weeks, "Rasha, I want to make you a real offer, not just a trade arrangement." She raised an eyebrow. He took a breath. "Stay on the farm with me, not as a visitor, not as a trade partner, though I want that too, as my partner." As someone who belongs here, I have 40 acres and good soil and a plan, and I have been alone in this place for 4 years, and I would very much like to not be alone anymore, and specifically I would like to not be alone with you." She looked at him for a long moment in the morning light, with the spring wind off the water moving the ends of her braid and the sea glass beads swinging gently. "I told you," she said. "I do not do things I am not sure of." "I know," he said. "I am sure of this," she said. And then, with the directness that he had loved from the first morning at the fire, "Yes, Cyrus, I will stay." Behind her, Das the trader was making a significant effort to be interested in the fence line. The negotiation took 3 days rather than a week, because Rasha ran it with the efficiency she brought to everything, and because Cyrus had done his planning thoroughly enough that the proposals were solid. The formal arrangement between Crawford Farm and the Mudborn clan trading network was set down in a document that Das drafted in the clan's formal style fair price for fair goods, a 3-year initial term with renewal provisions, a minimum purchase agreement that gave Cyrus the stable income he needed to service the debt and then eliminate it, and a percentage arrangement on any specialty goods that exceeded the minimum target. Das and Fenn assessed the south slope and the lower valley fields and the spring water access, and they looked at each other in the measuring way of people who know land and know what they are looking at, and Das said, in a tone that managed to be both professional and faintly pleased, "It will do." After Das and Fenn left, heading back to the coastal route, Rasha stood in the yard of the farm in the early spring afternoon and looked at the south slope and the lower fields and the house with the new tile on the roof where the bare spot had been, because Cyrus had replaced it the previous week, and she breathed the air off the sea, which was different here than at the cove, warmer, sheltered, with the particular green note of coastal valley growth beginning underneath the brine. He stood beside her. "Well," he said. "It smells different here than at the cove," she said. "Yes," he said. "Better or worse," she considered. "Different," she said. "But it is growing on me." She looked at him. The amber of her eyes was deep and steady and full of everything that had passed between them, the fire and the cave and the gale and the ice and the boat hull and the card table and the cliff fall and all the nights of talking in the dark. "So are you," she added. He laughed, and she smiled, a real smile, broad and warm, the one that transformed her face into something that stopped him every time. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair back from her face, and she let him, and he could feel the smooth curve of her ear under his fingers and the copper of the lowest ring, cool in the spring air. "The first planting is in 6 weeks," he said. "There is a lot of soil work before that." "I know," she said. "I have the amendment schedule in my kit." "You brought it with you." "I brought it with me," she confirmed. Along with several seed packets the clan supplier sent ahead for trial planting, sea lavender as promised, also a cultivar of samphire that does well in your exact soil type. He stared at her. "You planned all of this before you got here." "I told you I was coming back," she said simply. "When I say a thing, I mean it." He had known this from the first morning at the fire. He had known it from the first time she had said her name, and told him where she was going and offered no more and no less than exactly that. He had known it every day since, in every clear and certain thing she had said and done. He put his arms around her, in the yard of his 40 acres of coastal valley land, and she settled against him with the ease of someone who has come home. The moneylender in Salter's Reach received his first payment significant, larger than any previous 4 months into the first growing season, when the Roxham fire had taken on the south slope with an enthusiasm that surprised even Rasha, and the sea lavender was coming in on the lower rows in the way that good sea lavender does when the soil suits it, and the clan traders made their first collection with Das, personally supervising the weighing and confirming what everyone had hoped. The Crawford yield was excellent. Coastal, clean, harvested correctly. The cooperative would be pleased. The debt, which had been the thing that sat in Cyrus's chest like a stone for 4 years, was not gone. That would take time, and time they had, but it had changed shape. It had become something manageable, something with an end in sight, something he could see past into the fields beyond it. Rasha was in the lower valley field when he came back from Salter's Reach with the receipt in his hand, and she was knee-deep in fennel plants that were coming in better than the most optimistic projection, checking the stems with the focused attention she brought to everything. And she looked up at the sound of his boots on the field path and saw his face before he said a word. She stood straight and her expression went warm and certain. "Good news," she said, not a question. "Very good news," he said. She came out of the fennel and he met her at the edge of the field, and she took the receipt from his hand and read it, and then she handed it back and she looked at him with the direct and steady gaze of someone who is feeling something she is very comfortable feeling. "In 2 more seasons," she said, "you will be clear." "In 2 more seasons," he agreed. "And after that the yields are profit. All of it," he said, "clean." She put both hands on his face, the warm, rough hands that knew salt water and leather and sea-clay soil, and she looked at him the way she had looked at him across the dead fire of that first morning when she had finally said her name with full and complete attention and the particular warmth of choosing something. "You are going to be all right," she said. He put his hands over hers. "We," he said. She was quiet for a moment. The spring wind moved through the fennel behind her and brought the salt of the sea up from below the cliff, and the sky above the valley was the clear pale blue of a good growing day. "We," she agreed, and there was everything in the word, the farm and the debt and the caves and the storm and the fire and the broth, and the morning she had finally said her name, and she kissed him in the fennel field in the afternoon light, and he held her, and the 40 acres of coastal valley land grew green around them, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the whole of it.